What if I told you that Scooby Doo was a successful creation by Soviet scientists to create a space dog, and his existence poses a threat to international safety, which is why Mystery Incorporated is always on the move? There's this theory online that claims that Scooby Doo was a creation of Soviet-Russian scientists in the 1960s who wanted to create a dog with above-average intelligence who could pilot a rocket well enough to get into space and perform test flights. But it turns out that Scooby was the only real success of the effort, and when one of the scientists bonded with him as a puppy, he couldn't bring himself to send Scoob into space. So he defected to the US, bringing Scooby with him. When the scientist died, Shaggy adopted Scooby.
He's like totally mine.
And the rest is pretty much the show that you know and love. Oh, except the CIA somehow realizes that Scooby is a Soviet genius and decides to spend their days hunting down Scooby and the Mystery Incorporated gang who, for some reason, drive around in a giant neon van and become supernatural vigilantes while fleeing the authorities. Now, I know what you're thinking, it's an insane theory and it makes no sense. Sure, yes, kind of, but also no, because this very thing was happening in the 1960s, in real life. Seriously, the Russians often sent animals into space before they tried it with humans. And in the late 50s, they really did send a dog, Laika, into space. She died, so it's not a great story, but it happened. So it's not the most unrealistic thing to send a super smart, genetically engineered, talking dog to pilot spaceships for the government. Okay, it's a completely insane thing to suggest, but the theory makes sense when you look at certain details of the show. Let's start with the title of the show itself. Some of these titles make no sense when you remember that the show is about a dog and his friends solving supernatural crimes. I mean, Scooby Doo, where are you? What's new, Scooby Doo? Be cool, Scooby Doo? None of those sound like the things that Mystery Incorporated is saying to Scooby Doo. They never lose him, for one thing, and they're always around, so there's no reason to ask where he is or what he's been up to. And he only freaks out when they also freak out, so why tell him to be cool? But if we think about it in the context of Mystery Incorporated being chased down by the CIA, absolutely. I mean, all three of those titles have a whole other meaning now. Scooby Doo, where are you? Could be about the CIA's mission to find him, no matter which swamp they decide to hide in. What's new, Scooby Doo? Sounds kind of like a threat by the people hunting him down. And Be Cool, Scooby Doo really sounds like them trying to calm him down when they eventually catch him. Obviously, the creators never intended any of this to be the case, but I have to say it works pretty well with the theory, and even more so when you start to look at the theme song. I mean, Scooby Doo, where are you theme isn't too bad. I guess we have some work to do now, could be interpreted as the CIA or the Soviets if you want to look at it that way, but What's New, Scooby Doo is absolutely unhinged. We get lyrics like, we're coming after you, and we see you, Scooby Doo. These are not the things you say to the friend helping you solve a crime. They're the things you say to the shady character committing crimes, or the hyper-intelligent dog that you're currently hunting across the globe, right? But then you come to this lyric, the trail leads back to you. What? I mean, even if you ignore the theory entirely and just focus on the idea of a bunch of teens solving crimes with their super smart dog, it makes absolutely no sense. There's no trail at the heart of Mystery Incorporated's cases. In fact, most of the cases they end up solving are ones they stumble on purely by accident when they're traveling somewhere else. None of it ties back to Scooby or the Mystery Incorporated gang, so what trail are they even referring to? I think there are two possibilities. Number one, we have the CIA. We know they're out looking for Scooby and the Mystery Incorporated gang, so they probably want to know all about what the Russians are up to, and Scooby is so smart he could help them. So maybe they're talking about the trail to the Soviets. It all leads back to Scooby. He has some knowledge about it they need. Okay, reasonable. Number two, maybe it's the Soviets themselves. These meddling kids know too much, and so does their not dumb dog. So if the trail leads back to Scooby, it implies that there's an active attempt at a cover-up. If they get him, they might even kill him and the Mystery Incorporated gang. They just want to protect themselves from American interference. And honestly, as insane as this all is, it makes so much more sense than if you just take the titles and themes at the surface level. They just don't make sense when you look at the show as a group of kids solving crimes, only when you think about them being on the run from some shady government entity who wants to either kill Scooby or use him for their own nefarious nefarious purposes. And the episodes really seem to back up the theory that they're always on the run. As I mentioned earlier, they're never looking for the ghosts or the mysteries. Actually, an episode from the 1969 show Scooby Doo, Where Are You? Opens the exact same way. The Mystery Incorporated gang is driving somewhere. That's kind of it. There's no clear direction or urgency, they just drive somewhere, get lost or held up, and then find themselves drawn into a case. It's interesting watching this show now because they really tell you nothing about these characters outside of their mysteries. It's very believable to me that they just live in the van, and given the amount of questionable smoke pumping out of the window, these people should not be allowed to drive that vehicle. Anyway, the point is that because every episode opens without any context, it's super easy to just buy into the idea that they're on the run, moving from place to place with no clear direction to escape the CIA. What's New Scooby Doo kind of does this too, but bigger. There's not much difference between these shows besides the time period, the modern clothing, and the occasional glimpses of these guys in a world that isn't all haunted houses and stinky vans. When these episodes open, the gang is in motion to some other location, and it's almost always somewhere glamorous. Some episodes open with them in Egypt, Tokyo, or other internationally recognizable locations, but always with a purpose. They're not just aimlessly driving now, they're doing something, whether that's going to a concert or visiting a friend, but then, as usual, they stumble onto a case and have to work on their vacation. The usual. Now, I think I could explain this change pretty easily, because back in the 1960s, it was not as easy to travel around the world as it is today. I mean, if you were a group of kids on the run from a sinister, shady governmental organization who wants to kill your dog, you'd be limited to the backwoods of the United States, just like the Mystery Incorporated gang. But by the mid-2000s, they would have more resources, and apparently they have made an unimaginable amount of money from solving these mysteries, so why would they limit themselves to any swamp USA when they could literally get as far away from the CIA as possible? Of course you're going to hop a flight. The fact that you get a whole new culture and, more importantly for Shaggy and Scooby, food. In fact, I think the only reason they became Mystery Incorporated at all is to try and convince the CIA that Scooby is not a threat to the nation. His Soviet roots would almost definitely lead the US government to label him as a danger, and I'm sure they'd do everything to take him out. And if I was a stoned teenager on the run from the CIA, I would probably also think that solving some mysteries would be enough to convince them that Scooby didn't want to nuke the American Midwest. But I'm not convinced that would ever be enough to convince them that a talking dog from Russia isn't going to hurt them. In fact, let's talk about that, because Scooby is not even a Russian dog. He's a Great Dane, which is actually a German breed, so it implies that maybe the Soviets hired German scientists to help develop these breeds that could go to space, which again, in the 1960s would not be appealing to the US, even more so given that Scooby is fluent but has a speech impediment.
Third level, lots of luck. What? Like what did you say, Scoop?
Now, to be fair to Scoobert Doo, he is a dog. He is not capable of speaking English as we are. Their mouths are just not designed for it. But the fact he can talk at all is a huge accomplishment and one that any nation would be desperate to have. So why is Scooby the one they want and not all the other dogs just like him? Well, we know he isn't the only one who was a success in this experiment. Throughout the entire franchise of Scooby-Doo, we've met many of his family members, including Scooby-Dum, Scooby-Dee, and the notorious Scrappy-Doo. So, it's obvious that the Soviets mastered the talking dog thing, although the intelligence was a little more hit and miss. But if we believe that Scooby was taken from the Soviet lab and defected to the United States, then how did these other talking dogs make their way there? I mean, there are thousands of ways to interpret it, but I think it's as simple as the Soviet scientist taking all of the dogs back with him no matter their intelligence. Scooby-Dum found a home with a family in a swamp, and maybe the scientists did their best to keep Scooby-Doo and Scrappy together, only to get exhausted by Scrappy and somehow dump him on someone else. Now, the 2010 series Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated was totally different than any other incarnation, in that it told one story over 2 seasons, and in that story story, they really tried to give a cohesive and clear explanation for why Scooby can speak. In the show, Scooby-Doo keeps having bizarre nightmares, which culminate in him speaking directly to a spirit inhabiting the body of his love interest, Nova. Nova tells him that he is one in a long line of Anunnaki, a race of intelligent creatures who can cross into their universe and take the form of wise talking animals. The first Mystery Incorporated has a secret alien in the form of an animal sidekick, a bird known as Professor Pericles, and then got tricked into unleashing a sinister evil entity. Scooby must now prevent it from happening again. It's a lot to take in. Actually, Mystery Incorporated is a really interesting take on the series, and it leans heavily into the darker horror influences that other Scooby-Doo series avoid. But I think the Soviet theory just makes so much more sense than the ancient alien explanation. Honestly, considering how influential and wise these Anunnaki were, it doesn't make sense that Scooby would be so scared of everything. Surely he would be ready and wise enough to overcome it all. But if he's on the run or hunted down by some kind of shadowy government entity out to get him, well, that makes sense and explains why he's so scared of everything.
You're not remotely important. It's the dog I need.
Any of these monsters could be real, sure, but the fact that they're almost always just men in costumes is scarier to him because they could be the government agents out to kill him. I think that's why this theory works so well. It makes a lot of sense that the gang would have to move from place to place and why Scooby and Shaggy are so scared, even though every monster they encounter is just some guy pretending to be a ghost. Their only focus is on protecting Scooby from the dangers of the people out to get him. It also provides a great reason why Scrappy-Doo is so annoying. He was one of the mistakes. We don't need anything more than that. I don't know, man. I just like cartoons. Like Zoink Scoob! I think they're on to us! Rust it on there, Raggy.